Now, there's a lot to learn from spreadsheets and data and facts. It's not to poo-poo that, but I think there is just a layer of behavior that sits above it to where if you understand all of the facts and the data, but you can't control your behavior, none of it matters. And there's a flip side to that, which is the person who has good control over their behavior, but doesn't really know any of the facts. They don't have any financial education. They never went to business school. They're a country bumpkin who just kind of saves some money and invests, but they have a good sense of their greed and fear. They can take a long-term mindset. That person can do incredibly well, even if they don't know any of the technical attributes of investing. And it's one of the very few fields where that exists. Like, there's no world in which an amateur can outperform a Harvard-trained cardiologist at open heart surgery. You have to be a technical expert to do it. But in investing, you have these situations where the country bumpkin does very well and the hedge fund manager blows up at the exact same time. And that's a very unique thing. And it's because behavior plays such a grand influence in investing and sits above all the technical skills.
Right. I want to ask you about another book that you've written, which is called Same as Ever. And there you talk about things that don't change. I'm wondering why that's useful and what those things are.
Some of this came from my frustration, our inability across the whole industry to predict the next recession, the next bear market, the next technology. It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do it, at least to do it consistently, to predict what's going to happen next. And so there are two things you can do with that observation. You become even more of a cynic and just say, nobody knows anything about the future, don't even try. Or you can take a step back and say, look, there's a lot that we don't know, but there is a category of things that we do know. And if you're a student of history and you look back, you'll realize that the way that people respond to greed, fear, uncertainty, new technology, volatility, it's the same today as it was 100 years ago, as it was 500 years ago. And because of that, you can accurately say it's going to be the same 100 years from now. Like, that part of human behavior just doesn't change. So then you can say, okay, rather than trying to predict the next recession, let's spend our time focusing on how people respond to recessions, their behaviors around it, how they think about loss and volatility. And then whenever the next recession comes, I have no idea what's going to cause it or when it's going to come, but I know exactly how people will respond to it because that has always been the case. I think if you do that, you have a much more accurate view of what's going to happen in the future. If you take the humble view of saying, I don't know what's going to change, but I know how people are going to respond to change whenever it comes.
If you have a take on the stock market, and if so, what it is right now?
I have lots of takes. Here's one thing that might be a little bit different. I follow the stock market very closely. I check it all day, every day. I check the futures, but it never influences the decisions that I make as an investor. I dollar cost average into index funds that I hope to own for the next 50 years. And I don't think that's an irony or a contradiction, because I think markets are a window into human behavior that are so fascinating. I love witnessing how people respond to news and greed and fear. It's this amazing window into humanity, I think. But as an investor, I just want to hold on tight for as long as I can. And the game that I'm playing is, like, if I can be merely average as an index fund investor for an above average period of time, that I will probably end up in the top 5% of investors without trying and without virtually paying any fees to do it. I can spend the rest of my time hanging out with my kids and writing books and things like that. One thing that's important is that just because I invest like that doesn't mean I think others necessarily should either. Like, it works for me, but I know a lot of my very smart friends could not look themselves in the mirror if they were investing like that. It doesn't fit their personality. Most financial debates, when people are arguing like, oh, you should invest like this, no, you should buy this stock, you should do that, they're not actually debating each other. It's people with different risk tolerances, different skill sets, different ambitions who are just talking over each other. That's the majority of market commentary, are different people talking over each other. And so I just want to be a long-term owner of capitalism and benefit from that. And rather than trying to guess what the stock market's going to do next, just be a beneficiary of compounding over the next 50 years. Now, if you were to pin me in a corner and say, what do I think about the stock market today at these valuations? Look, things have been extremely good for a very long period of time. And if you put that against any historical narrative, you could say, look, it makes sense to not expect over the next 20 years what we've achieved over the last 20 years. That makes a lot of sense. I would believe in that. I would also remind people that what I just said would have made perfect sense in 2012 and 2013. If you and I were sitting here in 2013 and I said, don't expect going forward what's happened over the last 5 years, it would have made perfect sense. And a lot of smart people said that. So just because you can look at valuations and come up with some sort of take on it does not mean you have any clue whatsoever exactly when that's going to play out.
Hey, Morgan, what are some of the common mistakes that investors make? You sort of alluded to some of those, I think, when you were just talking now, but what are some?
I think two big ones. I think most financial mistakes are when people make a decision that is good advice for somebody else, but not for them. It's hard to recognize that that was a mistake because you're following good advice that was given to you by a wise and well-meaning person. But for a lot of people, they go to their financial advisor and they say, look, long-term investing is great. You should be 80% in stocks or whatever it might be. And that is good advice maybe for you and not for me or whatever it might be. And so the biggest mistake that people make is not being introspective enough about who they or their family, their spouse is and wants to be and what their actual risk tolerance is and what they're willing to put up with. I use this interesting example of my parents are, in their 70s and retired, and they have a more aggressive asset allocation than I do. And I am not in my 70s and retired. And look, it makes sense for them. Look, I would say on a spreadsheet from a financial advisor, that makes no sense. That a retiree is taking more risks than someone who is still in their prime working years. That makes no sense. But if you understand their personality and my personality, it totally makes sense. They know what they're doing. I know what I'm doing. I hope at least. And it makes sense for that. So I think you need to be a little bit more introspective about who you are and what you're trying to do and not chase somebody else's dream. The other is viewing market volatility as an indication that somebody did something wrong, that either a politician did something wrong, the Fed did something wrong, businesses did something wrong, versus what it actually is 99% of the time, which is the cost of admission for doing well over time. The whole reason that the stock market does well over time is specifically because it is volatile and uncertain in the short term. That's the ticket fee at the gate that you have to be willing to pay. And if there was no volatility, there would be no return. There'd be no opportunity. And so when you experience volatility, if you have that mindset, you stop saying what went wrong and who should I blame? And you start saying, this is the price that I need to be willing to pay to do well over time. It's so simple, it's so basic, but it's so easy to overlook, even among the smartest investors out there.
The blog at the Collaborative Fund, your most recent one, is about independence, which I thought was fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that, why that's important, and what we can learn from understanding that?
I think financial independence is the most reasonable goal for most people. That if you have an incentive to accumulate wealth over time, that by and large, it's not so you can have a bigger house or a faster car, even though I like both of those things. It's so that you can have independence. We all know that you're going to get used to and accustomed to the fancy toys over time. It's not to say there's no value to them, but they're going to give you a short jolt of dopamine and then you're going to get over it. But waking up every morning and saying, I can do whatever I want today with whomever I want for as long as I want. I can work where I want and when I want. I can retire when I want. That is a lifestyle boost that you will never become accustomed to. It will always feel great. And maybe what's even more true is that it's opposite, which is that you are beholden to somebody else's goal or somebody else's priorities. That is a decrease in most people's mental well-being that is very hard to get over as well. So to the extent that you can use wealth for independence, I think it is the highest ROI that any money pays over time. Of course, I like a nice lifestyle. I want to take care of my family and whatnot. But mainly what I want money for is every dollar of savings is a piece of my future that I own and somebody else does not. And look, I'm not a hardcore libertarian either. But for financial independence, I think it's so overlooked that is what money can give you. And what's very interesting are when you meet people who have a high net worth and maybe they think they're financially independent, but they're absolutely not. They're completely beholden to their boss, to their shareholders, whoever it might be. Like just because you have a high net worth and just because you have enough money to pay all your bills indefinitely does not mean you're independent. So independence goes so far beyond just financial independence. It's the ability to think the way that you want to. It's moral independence, cultural independence, just the ability to live life in your own way is, I think, one of the highest areas that you can reach in life.